Hello, welcome to today's video. We will be doing a modestly quick European roundup of uh, the quarterfinals and the first leg across the Champions League, Europa, and Conference League. Of course, and so I did manage to catch a decent number of the games this week, luckily enough. So we'll just be walking through, FOTMob, a very nice website, which has uh, you know, nice visualizations, especially this feature of shots. Um, of course, and of course, giving them the plug, right? And then for specific players, right, you can go even more in depth, which is a visualization like this is actually really helpful. So highly recommend FotMob, right? Free to use and very helpful. But starting from the top, let's just talk about uh, the games that happened, and we'll start with Arsenal versus Bayern. Of course, the Champions League games simultaneous kickoffs, um, and so I split screen. So I had the games on side by side, but my focus was on uh, City versus Madrid versus Real. Um, but we could still from the gist, right? And not too much to say. Of course, the joke is right. Like Arsenal, Bayern have faced each other a good amount of times, with Bayern coming out on top. Right, and clearly we can see right, like Arsenal a lot of possession, right, um, but not necessarily that fluidity, right? And think about like a big piece, right? Like, they don't have uh, like a legitimate conventional striker or number nine, right? That you can use to help unlock. And so what happens with Arsenal is that they do a lot of passing around the box. Like do a really good job of you know negating bypassing your press, and then what happens is generally speaking, like they they don't do quick crosses. They like to or generally right, like the other team, right, is defensively organized enough to not allow for easy balls in. And so what happens is then they just recycle the ball, slowly allows uh, their center backs to move up, and just create like these nice passing triangles. But what that's an indictment, right, of right, you have a lot of passing triangles around the box, but you don't necessarily have any uh, form of penetration to get shots that are more penetrative, right? And you can kind of get visualization of that from this shot graph, right? Like you don't really have anything that's inside the 6 yard box, right? Any crosses, right? A bit more things there outside the box, right? Just passing triangles, and you get enough of an angle that you can take the shot um, on goal. Uh, but that's what happens, right? And it works like in the Premier League. Like, of course, like it's an effective thing, right? It's somehow possession is defense, right? In that like Pep Guardiola style, uh, which I think compare, and we'll certainly get to Liverpool, but Liverpool's right, controlled chaos, right, very direct play, whereas City, right, play very much a possession game, which is, and of course that makes Liverpool games much more uh, high pace in that sense, right? And to some degree that makes it a better viewing experience. But as we saw with Liverpool versus Atlanta, right, that if you're if your players have an off day getting shots on goal, and the other team is defensively solid and can put some pressure on your midfield to make it hard to just easily bypass and get to your wingers, then that can happen. And so again, of course, Bayern, right, very bipolar team. Um, now as that can be said, right? I mean, you think about the midfield, right? Goretzka, and in this case, they put in Limer, whereas uh, I know that they have, at times had Kimmich in midfield instead of right back, or completely just used Pavlovic in there instead to help out the midfield. I expected, certainly with Bayern's performance against Hoffenheim, so I expected Arsenal's midfield to be a bit more dominant against these guys with like Declan Rice, uh, Erdegaard, and of course, right, the entire right, and of course, to the power point of how Arsenal don't really have that conventional number nine. Well, the way they balance it out is by then having Kai Havertz, who's certainly more of an attacking midfield. He's more in a sense you could say a number 10, right, playing in that number 10 role, right, as like attacking midfielder, maybe shadow striker, uh, to help, and pretty much that would create an overload, right? High risk dropping in, right? And so effectively, you then have uh, just like off numerically, right? You theoretically, if you have Rice, Jorginho, Erdegaard, and Havertz dropping it, right, you have like basically functionally a four versus two, just from like that, abstraction of your midfield. Uh, but again, right, but naturally, right, as you progress the ball up the field, and certainly if you beat the first line, but if you don't have a winger that can then beat that first man, then right, then the other team can get back, reset up their lines, and then right back to prior point, just like say Arsenal, then just set up your passing triangles, um, and, and then you're not really penetrative in that regard. Uh, of course, and then for Bayern, I think in some like the debrief from the game, uh, like Arsenal, they do have a pretty solid pressing system uh, defensively. And you think about just these players, right? Like these are all pretty high work rate players. Certainly Kai Havertz, gets certainly in the first half of the season, for much of his Chelsea stint, a lot of flack, but like he does put in a work rate. As you think about it, right, like you have right, these guys, and so granted numerically, right, it's like you have 10 outfield players, 10 outfield players, um, and if you're and so Neuer's distribution, of course, there was that clip of Neuer perfectly chipping it over um, over to one Arsenal player. And you think about just right and right because presumably right the entire point of pressing is to basically um, it's not necessarily to win the ball unless you're playing like that high tempo of a full press, um, which is very hard to sustain for a full 90 minutes, right? And so generally the entire pressing structure right is generally to just like condense the field to make it easier then for everybody uh, to get set right. Like if you're pressing, so generally right, you can think of like you're pressing to just force the field to condense the field down to this way, right? So now you're going to close off, uh, say like Neuer is distributing a ball right from a goal kick, right? Conventionally, right, you think that uh, you press and numerically, right, you can only have so many players, up front or going man for man, unless you want to leave yourself vulnerable at the back. So now, so right, you're going to press maybe this side and condense the field this way, and then right, it's much easier, right? Because then your back four can swing that way, get condensed, right? So no one's left one on one versus Kane, and of course the thing right with Gabriel and Saliba, right? Earlier into or last week, right? They had a game against City where they did a pretty good job of marking Holland out of the game, right? So you'd feel comfortable with that matchup. But again, having a keeper like North has distribution, right, to like invert that pressing, or also can do good passes down the field uh, to just like completely bypass that first line of the press, right? It's really helpful. And we saw with PSG, Paris Saint-Germain versus Barcelona, right? Donnarumma and some of his distribution wasn't the best, which meant that they couldn't really bypass that first line of the Barca press. So, so that was that. And I do think, right, like for all the issues Bayern had, they do have a strong ability to structure the field right in Sane, right? You had a couple really good runs, right? And then you think about ball carriers, right? Like Musiala, right? Drop in, help with the build up, right? Kimmich as a right back, right? Allows right Barnes to pretty easily, right? Have a back three of Kimmich to like Dyer. Uh, Maybe have Gretzky or Limer drop in to create like your triangles, and then have Davies push up to basically act as a second winger. We can see more of Davies' skill set, right? Uh, Offensively. Only thing that can be said, very interesting decision to have Kiwior over Zinchenko. Personally, I agree with that. Um, because I do not rate Zinchenko much, especially when Zinchenko is basically right. He basically inverts into midfield, uh, which is helpful in certain contexts. But now, so right, if Zin, Zinchenko tucks into midfield, right, that's basically if you're pretty confident you're going to be dominant possession wise, right, and just want to again back to the power point of like recycling possession and just progressing the ball, right, defense through possession. But a game like this, right, where you can the other team has pace, they can punish you in right, leaving those spaces open, right? I'd agree with having Kiwi out. So that was the game. I mean, again, with Bayern, it's always a question of what you expect, especially if of what to expect, especially with Tuchel. But um, it's certainly an open game. Of course, you had that Saka incident. Probably easier to get a shot on goal, but um, yeah, second leg. Um, not really sure. Again, the big question is going to be how if Arsenal decide to play Kiwi works. But the big thing is right. A lot of it does depend right on again back to the point right of like, do you have that moment to counter or to progress the ball before the opponent gets to the lines? And so a lot depends on Martinelli or Saka having the ability to dribble. And as we saw from Saka's first goal, right, which was a really nice curler into the right, nice dribble, beat his first man, then curled it, right. Like that goal came from Saka beating his man, and of course the brilliance to place the shot. Uh, but again, a lot of it depends on the ability to beat um, the man, and that's of course going to be variable. So it's hard to say who's going to progress from Arsenal, uh, Bayern second leg. Um, it's likely not going to be a shootout. Um, but personally, I will. Yeah, it's very hard to call you. It's hard um, to trust Bayern's midfield per se to help control the game. But if I had to pick, um, I will go Bayern. A bridge too far for the Gooners, and I do think at that point then having players that can bail you out, and I do think that Munich do have some more players that can bail them out with moments of individual brilliance like Kane, or again some of those wingers right like Coman. Whereas I think especially with Arsenal, just again back to like those um like that those triangles right, just maintain that possession. I think in a knockout game right, um can maybe lead to a bit of stagnation and not the most incisiveness, which again kind of fades into then Bayern's uh, counter-attacking setup, which can work right against Sane and Kane. On to Madrid City. I was watching this game mainly, and so I was a bit surprised, right? Personally, I thought the game would have been much more controlled, right? Because that is Pep Guardiola's entire system, right? Because if you think about how he started to use this, right, basically like three center backs, or even when he played and it plays in a back four, right, four center backs across the entire back line, uh, right, and the entire gist basically is like a way to control the game to a much greater degree. And think about right having John Stones playing in your midfield, right, or effectively, right. Think about right, so Bernardo Silva, Kovacic, Foden, Rodri, and Stones. They can all uh, effectively play as midfielders, right? Like we think about Silva, he can very effective, very good player. He can play basically as midfielder. So think about it, right? Functionally, he's stacked basically with five midfielders. And again, and he's played a kanji in midfield as well uh, this season, right? So he affects. And so the entire joke right, of Pep Guardiola is that he he'd want to have an entire lot starting 11 of midfielders. So we get ever closer to that day. Um, but the entire point right is, and you think about previous Madrid City encounters, whether last season where City won pretty decisively, or uh, the year or 2 years before when Madrid had that incredible comeback. Right, and so a lot of like the reasons Madrid had success was right. You think about like Vinicius's goal, uh, started by getting that nutmeg on Fernandinho. Is right Madrid able to counter and get Vinicius or Rodrigo just running down the field and stretching City on a counter. And so my thinking was right, knowing City played this system right of three center backs, four center backs, five center backs. The entire idea is just control the game and just have possession and just not allow those things to happen. And you think about right moments happen right like Vinicius's goal, we got sprung loose and got basically went one on one with a Kanji, right? Like that uh, was a surprise. Or excuse me, Rodrigo got sprung loose. But again, right, like this Kamavinga shot, which led to Diaz's own goal, right? Or this Valverde wonder goal, um, were impressive. And again, right, impressive job by Rudiger marking Holland, nullifying the game a lot. Very similar to again like the like last year where Madrid City like tied 1-1, and of course in the second leg, uh, Eder Militao was put in, and of course Tchouaméni is going to be out the second leg. And so the big thing, right? You think about, um, and so I think the big thing in this game was just how impressive Camavinga was in covering ground and really helping out, right? Because a bit of the critique last year was how having a Cruz, Modric, Valverde midfield, uh, right? Because I believe that at that point, Camavinga's kind of playing like back as a right back or left back. Uh, was just the fact, right, that you need to cover ground in order to do this, right? Because otherwise, and you saw this in moments, right? Again, like City were uh, like strong periods of dominance, right? Like because they can pass the ball, recycle it, um, maybe try to spring it loose to Holland, get the ball back, and just keep on recycling. Um, and so in order to try to counter that, and especially right when you have players like Rodrigo, Vinicius who can counter, you'd want to win the ball up the field and then allow those moments of transition where you can cause chaos uh, and take advantage of those moments. And having Camavinga, you know, for a full 90 who has the mobility and can do so, it's up for it. Because then Valverde is also similar, very high work rate, but then right like Tony Cruz or Modric, right, a bit less so. Uh, and the Bellingham, right, is very clearly playing functionally like attacking midfielder. Like it's not much like a number 10 role, right? And so the entirety is right, having Kamavinga helps balance the midfield and give it that extra mobility. And so the big thing was making sure he doesn't get yellow carded for the second leg. And Zoe's not, so he's going to stay in, which is big. Tchouaméni being out probably leads to Militao or not sure, which could be an issue. Carvajal was interesting to see how often or how much freedom he was allowed to go up to field. So he was playing like tucking in as like an inverted winger at times. Um, so again, Madrid again, like the results were numerically right. Um, maybe a bit fortunate to stay in, but um, I do think this setup right nullifies Man City's long balls to bypass a press. Um, and then it ultimately comes down to like a midfield battle, just who can force transitions or close down spaces. I think in a game like that, where it's not long balls as much as just passing and just fighting around in the middle of the field, right, middle of the pitch, then having Camavinga work rate with Valverde is really helpful to just run after these passing triangles. And for City, can't say too much um, went wrong, right? Of course, moments of brilliance with Gvardiol's and Foden's goal. It's only for the Gvardiol goal I thought does it. He let the touch get away from him, but really nice job from him uh, to place that. Uh, so second leg, uh, it's in Manchester, of course. Um, I highly doubt it's going to be as free flowing, high scoring as this match. Just given again, right? Like you look at how City's playing, right? Like, clearly playing to control the ball and not allow those transitions. But of course, they can be brought out, and again back to that Rodrigo account. Like they clearly were allowing themselves to get stretched or spread themselves out, which allowed for that 1-on-1. So second leg, of course, always hesitant to argue against Madrid, especially when you think about the goals where City's going to come from. I think Holland's going to be pretty well marked, right? Grealish, you know, maybe it's like who can score for City. It's going to again come down to um, this control of that midfield. So again, I think also a very tough leg to predict. Um, but if I had to pick, probably probably Madrid. I think be a very cagey match. But I think in moments like that, moments of I guess very much no tactical news to what I'm saying, but it's hard to game plan. But again, a lot comes down to the midfield. You just can't Camavinga, Valverde, keep up that energy, and then a lot uh, comes down to then can Vinicius and Rodrigo be involved in the game uh, and make sure they're tracking back, but also that being able to. And the big thing, right, is making is if um because I don't think it's wrong or hard to convince or to get approval of that, right? Vinicius and Rodrigo are more dynamic wingers than Cities, whether it's Grealish or Doku. Of course, assuming Doku even gets substituted in or plays. And so the big thing, right, and we'll talk about this in the context of the PSG Barca game, is Madrid's midfield going to be capable of springing the ball loose and getting it to Vinicius and Rodrigo, up on the halfway line and playing it forward for them. Let's talk about the PSG game against Barca. Um, there were opportunities, but the midfielders just could not make that ball. Right, that press, a suffocate, just then pass it. Right, just keep it pen in the first half. On to Wednesday, uh, Atletico versus Dortmund. Uh, Again, my main attention was on the PSG versus Barca game. But this one, you think about Dortmund this season, and it's very much an on-brand season or on-brand match for Dortmund, right? With the giveaway that led to Rodrigo de Paul's first goal, uh, and then of course, and then Lino's goal as well came from right Schlotterbeck and Hummels having a gaff at the back. Of course, Lino's how Kobel saved uh, this attempt um, really, I think, changed the tone. And of course, congrats to Sebastian Aller for getting that. But again, I don't think this game really showed too much. Again, I think you see that this front two is effective. Uh, you see the general shape of Atleti, right? This back three can easily turn into a back five. These guys tuck in, right? Marcos Llorente, lots of energy. It's always and you clearly see, right, like this back line, right, like Espilicueta and Axel Witsel, right, old old guys, right, um, and they're pretty comfortable playing that, right, because not necessarily anybody in Dortmund who's gonna be too much of a threat over the top. Maybe Adeyemi, but of course, consistent. Um, yeah, so not too much tactical news for this game, but and of course the possession. Again, my expectation is that Atleti could midfield. Just again structurally, I think um, like DePaul, Koke, Llorente, think is I think a more cohesive midfield than a Sabitzer, Emre Can, and certainly against with Nemecha. Uh, Julian Brandt playing being on the bench versus the match. I think that's something in the second leg that'll be interesting to see, right? This game again, Dortmund will be chasing, but also again, I think the match is more of a uh, of not so like that ball carrier as much as more of like that uh, extra like high work rate and just help uh, get up and down the field, but just help right with especially how Griezmann can tuck in the midfield, how Lino and Morata can sort of get forward, and how Molina uh, can sort of get these crosses in from wide positions, right? So that'll be a big thing to see. So again, it's hard to see. Again, certainly, Atleti they play uh, a more progressive style than I think the common assessment is, um, or certainly like extreme defensive solidity. Uh, so it's I think the second leg will be a relatively free flowing game because again like these goals where Griezmann uh, can pull magic out of his hat, and again like this back line right, like maybe you can improve it by having Savic in um instead of say Witsel, or like the composition will look differently. Um, so it's probably a free flowing second leg. Uh, I will rate Atleti. I just struggled to visualize Dortmund. Uh, hence having a strong structure with Terzic that can break down Atleti. Um, because I think Atleti, for all the defensive mishaps, like they do a good job at controlling situations, and you don't really see many um, loose counterattacks against Atleti side. Um, I I think it's probably easier to to beat uh, the first man versus Atleti in those controlled situations where it's just mano a mano, right? Like individual dribbling, just open the angle. I think Atleti, uh, uh, yeah, with the Morata, Griezmann, Lino, I think can cause troubles, especially right. Uh, going back to it, right? Like Ryerson and Matson, they both like going forward, right? Uh, and certainly Marius Wolf also, right? They can get forward. And I think in those moments of transition, where like Molina or Lino can just run down, right? When these two are caught out, um, and then Griezmann's causing Morata's causing trouble in the box, right? And you think about can Sabitzer or Emre Can, keep up with that? I think a very fair question, and I think that's the big thing. Just of course the joke is that Dortmund, right? They for some reason they struggle to keep the ball, or do some of those like 1-2s. So, but yeah, so I think Atleti will edge it out. I think it could be a free flowing game. It's not like there's initial goals and the team is forced to chase, but I think a match like that is very much in Atleti's wheelhouse. And I think especially as Dortmund have to chase the game, right, and as Ian Matson and Marius Wolf or Ryerson, get pushed up the field, try to overlap. I think Atleti can, uh, and so I think Atleti like high work rate players who will do pressing, and simultaneously Dortmund do have a lot of giveaways, and they're a bit sloppy. I think that combination with then those wing backs being pushed up will create room for Atleti. But again, Atleti not the most clinical at times. But so I'll edge Atleti edge over Dortmund. PSG Barca. Now this is the game I focused on. And so the big point I was making is that there was at least 4 times where you saw Mbappe or Dembele on the halfway line, uh, and very clear like good amount of space. Like there were like the center back who could cover them, but they had a lot of space to be in a true 1v1 situation. But the issue was that PSG could not get that ball to them, right? I was impressed by how Barcelona like managed to press PSG and made it tough for PSG uh, to spring those balls forward. Um, and so then right, so again right, and Mbappe right had a tough time getting past Kunde, but again Mbappe was effectively facing a 2 versus 1 for most of the times. He was set up right on the edge of the box and given uh, the ball to dribble. So I think how the big thing is second leg is if PSG's midfield can spring loose Mbappe and Dembele more effectively. I'm not sure if they can, because if you think about who else can go in that midfield, like Emery, or Zaire Emery, um, or Ugarte. Uh, like maybe you get Ugarte in that's a bit more of a press resistant. I would say. I don't think having Lee King in had the intended effect that uh, Luis Enrique Lucho was going for. I don't think he had too much control for PSG. That I don't think they could, because yeah, I think Fabian Ruiz is actually does a pretty good job with his profile and height. Um, and again, I think the other big tactical point is the difference in how right having Lewandowski, who isn't your traditional number 9, compared to Asensio, who's playing more of like that false 9 role, kind of also shifting out to the wings, so like Mbappe and Dembele move around. Um, I think that was certainly the significant structural difference, right? And so there's for Rafinha's first goal, right? The entire thing was Kubarsi, right? Played at the rec ball. It's Lewandowski, uh, who then sprung it loose to Yamal, who then crossed it for Rafinha uh, to tuck it in, right? And so, and you might wonder, well, how come Rafinha had so much space? And well, that's because then, right, the PSG players were still running back. Now, why were they running back? Because they were pressing, right? And some back to the points about pressing, uh, the points about pressing from the Arsenal Bayern match, right? The entire point of a press is that, again, numerically, because again, from conceptual, right, a press, right, the defending team is going to have 10 players they can use to press in different ways, right? Because the goalkeeper is not going to be pressing, whereas the offensive, your team in possession of the ball has 11 players, right? So by definition, there's going to, or conceptually, there could or should be an open man, and so the way, and so in that case, um, right, and so conceptually, when you're pressing, like there's going to be an open man, and so a lot of the effectiveness of the press comes down to are you controlling what part of the field that open man is going to be? So it's very easy for your team to shift and react. Or secondly, you can kind of make the gambit of you press the players around the ball, and then you leave yourself a bit more open at the back for 1-on-1 or leaving a man open. As what happened was Kubarsi played about Lewandowski, right? There was a clear right from the center back to the top line, right? And that bypassed the entire midfield, who were then sprung, right? Whereas being about PSG, like Asensio, I think is a very elegant player, right? I personally rate Asensio a lot. Um, but PSG just did not have the outlet. PSG's outlet is knocking Mbappe uh, or Dembele down, right? In those, uh, they're not even transition moments, but just in general, right? Like if they can get a quick pass off. Uh, but again, with how against like Kunde um, or Araujo, that's certainly a bit more of a tough issue. And I think, and then when Barca came out to press, right, I think a bit harder for these, and back to PowerPoint, right, how hard it was for this midfield uh, to spring balls loose. Uh, didn't quite uh, work as well. So I think that's the big difference, and I think the big thing will be if at all PSG's midfield changes. I don't think Zaire Emery coming into midfield, or Zaire Emery being only 18 makes me feel pretty introspective. Um, about my age, right? I don't think there's really a combination Luis Enrique can do in the midfield that will significantly change their ability to control the game outside of a complete uh, formation change. But if you're trying to combine Mbappe and Dembele, and use them in those uh, transition spaces, I don't really think you can. Um, so I think it does come down to like is if they play Gonzalo Ramos or Colomani again. It seems like Ramos has taken the step ahead of Mani, but I think that's a big thing. Like, because I think Barca are pretty much going to play the same thing, right? Like Lewandowski is going to be at number 9, and he gives them that outlet, right? Because he can hold the ball up and then spring loose. Whereas, so it's like an indirect way to play to your wingers. Whereas for PSG, right, because they don't have a hold up player, it's more of a direct way, and that directness that's recognized by the backline of Barca. Um, so I think that's going to be much harder. But again, right, but again, like you can't. All it takes is one slip, and then Mbappe and Nabelli are loose. Of course, I believe Hakimi will be eligible to play in the second leg. I don't think there's much you can do to change this back line because Nuno Mendes, right, very impressive, right, pushing Hernandez back into center back. Again, between Brado, Hernandez, Marquinhos, I think they're all maybe Skriniar comes back. I don't really think there's much you can do to improve this. Um, maybe Hernandez. Hernandez was a bit quiet. With Marquinhos was and Barada were the two ball carriers. And then of course Mendes in that back line. So I don't think there's too much. Maybe Hakimi, right, playing on the right side will overlap with Nabele. But then not really sure how much to help that would be for a player like Dembele. So honestly, I do think Barca are in a really strong position to see this out. Because again, like this back four, like Araujo, I think deserved like a 7+ rating. Was really massive in that defending. I have no idea how. I think again, Kvarsky did a very fine job. Because um, again, a lot of credit goes to the midfield. Because do you really, I like there wasn't really a one-on-one breakaway with Mbappe on the back line. It just showed that cohesiveness of the Barca press and back line, and also then PSG's difficulties in bypassing that effectively. And again, Donnarumma, right, the goalkeeper can somehow Neuer helped a lot, Bayern a lot in bypassing the Arsenal press. Having Donnarumma who can, or you can think about it, right? Uh, if you're trying to press out or you're moving up the press, your back four is going to be a bit more isolated. And so if you have a goalkeeper um, that could keep your back four honest, right? Then they have to stay back more, right? Because Mbappe and Dembele, they certainly have pace, right? So maybe the back line pushes back more to try to give themselves an extra yards, extra meters, um, which again just works, which then opens up space then for the midfield to have more space and time to allow Vitinha or Lee Kingen to set up a triangle and get the ball forward. But of course, Donnarumma, that's not necessarily in his wheelhouse. Um, which which will be a interesting challenge for the second leg. Milan versus Roma. As soon as I saw the starting lineup, it's such a classic Stefano Pioli uh, match. Again, look at this midfield, right? The entire gripe about this is some of the jokes are unfair. Of course, some of the screenshots are of course somewhat out of context. But the entire joke about Milan is that you have players who are playing up top who are like very clearly uh, you know around the opposing team's center backs. That part of the field, you have your however the build up is, whether it's your back four or back three at the time. So, and then the midfield was like it's like Reinders by himself, and then it's been like that. Gosh, because Milan, um, a bit functions. You think about how Milan, again, I think Milan's still one of the teams I have much more affection for. How Milan got certainly dismantled by Inter, uh, roughly at this time last season, about 11 months ago. That's because again, like this midfield is non-existent. You think about right? Like Loftus-Cheek isn't really that guy with that work rate, and it's not. I don't think it's his role to have to be that player to drop back because he is. You think about uh, with that with his size and technical ability, like he's good to have around the box. Um, so I think it's on him. But again, the system, right? You think about it, right? It just leaves Reinders and Benacer forced to cover so much ground, and then Adley. I guess certainly Adley is a pretty good technical player, but it's just a really tough task, especially when like Leao and Pulisic aren't really going to be tracking back. Certainly, Leao isn't really going to be that guy who's going to tuck in to help. Giroud isn't, and Loftus Cheek isn't really also. And they think about how Hernandez, right, really, and she's really uh, competent and good at getting forward. It's going to Calabria in this game did a bit more tucking in to help out. But the entire point is that this midfield gets real exposed. And certainly Reinders certainly likes to get forward. So the entire point is that just structurally you get situations where like you don't really have a strong shape, right? Because it and does gravitate into like a four like a 4-1-5 is kind of the joke that happens. And you think about Olivier Giroud's chance that went off the post, like Chuck Weze got the ball all the way over here and had to beat two Roma players to get there, right? So the entire gripe about uh, Pioli is just that he can't structure a midfield. Um, or again, like the midfield's just not there. And if you don't have a midfield that is stronger, the most coherent, you just struggle to control a game. And then when you have players like Shirawi or Lukaku, Pellegrini, or Dybala, it's only Dybala, Pellegrini, and Shirawi who are good ball carriers, right? And then Lukaku, who is that strong presence. Right, you just leave yourself much more open for a more stressful game. And of course, this game, maybe the results don't signify it, but again, like the gripe with just a struggle to control a game is the strong critique. So second leg in Roma at the Stadio de Olimpico. Um, it's hard to see, but again, Pioli is gonna roll out a lineup similar to this. Maybe he pushes Loftus Cheek into the two into like um one of these roles, and he tucks in Pulisic as like the number 10, and then he puts in Chukwueze out wide. Maybe he does that, but that doesn't change. If anything, that magnifies the issue because then Pulisic again isn't really that guy like, to help out, or it's not his job to per se, and Loftus Cheek isn't either, which just magnifies the midfield issues. And all it takes then is for like one of like Leao, Pulisic, or for a cross to Giroud to go wrong, and then Roma get the ball back and they can counter, and then the midfield is going to be completely empty. And again, right, like Ferrari, Dybala, Paredes, good ball, uh, good passer, right? Spinazzola can get down the field. I think Roma will prevail in the second leg because I think Milan will get caught out on the counter. Roma will score, and that's game Turkey finished. Uh, but again, it's all because of Pioli, and so once again, the Pioli out only gets stronger. Bayer, West Ham. You think about this starting 11 for Bayer. Maybe you could have Hradecky over Kovar in goalkeeper. Uh, but this is probably one of the stronger back lines or entire lineups for Bayer Leverkusen you can think of. Maybe Hincapié uh, could start in your back four. But hard to argue against that. But again, right, the like complete dominance by Bayer. Right. There's nothing much to say, just that Uh, again, I think Florian Wirtz is a bit because I think a player like Florian Wirtz is what Arsenal are missing who can work in those very tight half spaces and be a menace in the box. And there's so many moments where like Flores was dribbling around, and Frimpong would pick the ball up off him, and then Bayer would just like have the ball in the box, or in the concept where if it's in the box, um, then that's a more dangerous position. Whether it's the risk of a player giving away a penalty, or just by definition you're closer to the goal. I think a player like him is really helpful in breaking down and punishing teams that are playing in low block. Again, right, like this, like Sufal and Emerson, right? So easy for them just right to just become a back five, and then it's like how much can you really use? Again, Paqueta is kind of like your outlet player to then spring it loose to Antonio or Kudus, but then right, it's not the hardest thing in the world for Paqueta to be marked out the game. So it's very hard to see West Ham to how West Ham can change their maybe again go back to like their 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1. But again, you brought the same issue, right? Um, it's hard, especially with Bowen out. So it's and certainly like a Kudus and Antonio can stretch the field, but you're doing that in the non-control way, just like pinging a long ball over the top, right? Try to beat the press. You're not really doing it in a coherent way where you can like Ward Prowse or Suchek can break the lines, get to Paqueta, who can then do a nice diagonal ball. I think it's hard to see that, just given uh, how West Ham have been this season. It's hard to say, but likely that Bayer prevail. You think about Leverkusen versus whichever of these Italian teams. And similarly, uh, I think a pretty good shot getting to the final. Of course, fatigue and all of that. Benfica, Marseille. Of course, Benfica had a pretty tough time against Celtic, or excuse me, against Rangers. Um, I think a lot of Marseille's problems uh, haven't really changed. Again, right, I think having Enrique tuck in the midfield um, kind of makes this more like a 4-2-4 system, which I think puts a lot of pressure on Vertu and Kondogbia. And you think about uh, Di Maria's goal, where Neres just tucked it in, and Vertu was just like 3 yards behind, having to track back the entire way. Di Maria, right? So like the back four was completely exposed with that space that was open. You think about Rafa Silva's goal, where Silva basically um, ran from the halfway line all the way into the box for that layoff, right? And nobody from Marseille's midfield tracked back to stay with him, and I think that's because structurally the midfield effectively was two man. Harit has a high work rate in Kentucky, but I think structurally Marseille just let that midfield get overrun. I think so. Personally, I think in a second leg, like you need to play a player like Unai who can help. Again, like Unai is not necessarily like your defensive, juggernaut profile, but he does provide uh, that midfield control that's helpful. When you think about the goal that Aubameyang scored, where he was just sprung free by a well placed Unai pass. That's again, that's great coming from the midfield, which had control. Because again, like Mubanga, Arit, NDI, right, not necessarily your conventional number nines per se, right? As Benfica, um, Neves, impressive, um, with that work rate in midfield. Again, right, Cabral, uh, yeah, it's funny, have funny uh, offensive nicknames, I suppose. Struggling. Um, yeah, I do think this game can be open. Again, you think about this side of the bracket, pretty open. So given how Atlanta dismantled Liverpool, as we'll get to. But again, I think Benfica's goals came from right good wingers who can get down the field, as well as uh, Marseille's midfield not tucking back in to help, right? Just given the numbers that it was set up in. So I think the second leg, I'm pretty, still don't think that Marseille would make those changes. Um, but the second leg will be pretty open. Now, Atalanta, Liverpool again, right? Liverpool, they play very direct, and I think some of Zalba's signing, right, or some of the players they signed, right, with Endo as well, like they're very direct players. They're not really a possession style per se. Again, back to like that Pep thing, and that style can work when you can overwhelm your opposition uh, by getting the ball to like Nunez and or Mo Salah in the second half. But the issue comes when the other team is technically sound, defensively sound with players that aren't overwhelmed. That has a midfield that'll track back and cover those crossing lanes. Uh, that's the big thing, right? Think about how Atlanta is set up, right? Like Zappacosta, Ujiri, right, can tuck in, create a back five, and then Ederson, Pasalic, Koopmeiners, and the Ketlari, right? All right, that basically creates a four-man midfield up and down the field. Right, which again back to like that just structural numbers game, which can help you out again, right? And that kind of right made it hard for like Liverpool's midfield to play direct in that way that they like, which kind of meant them to go back to more traditional directness, or just balls up top. Um, but again, playing Atlanta's hand. So again, so again, I think Atlanta took a perfect advantage of just Liverpool's style, right? Of just being that's our potential. Of course, if the directness works, of course it's perfect, right? Uh, but of course, the counterfactual, which happened in this case, is that overly direct style does create these shootout moments, and then at times the back four can be suspect, or like in the case of Zoboslai giveaway for Pasalic's uh, tap in from the rebound off Kelleher, right? Like then your midfield's caught out, which then creates those transition moments. So, yeah, so I think that's not again. Of course, Liverpool didn't play the strongest lineup. You can see by having Harvey Elliott in your front three. Um, we'll see. Olympiacos versus Fenerbahce. The first half, like Olympiacos, uh, I think, I think like the possession and then the momentum. But I think looking at the first half, I think Olympiacos uh, did a pretty good job of progressing the ball down the field, and I don't think to me Fenerbahce didn't really have didn't look overly uh strong. Again, Sonchu's mistake uh led to that first goal. I think it's open. I think presumably the midfield is going to be like a Fred, maybe toss in Yuksek into the midfield. Although I do think Krunic did a pretty good job or decent job right in that like holding midfielder role. Um, I think Dzeko, Szymanski, and Tadic, did a pretty good job of being threatening, or it's only creating issues for that back line. So I think it's going to be an open game. But especially with how Ferdy is going to have to play for Oosterwolde. I do think Olympiacos are probably going to play on the counter. Right, Fenerbahce is on them to the onus is on them to break them down. I think this will be an open game. I think like Olympiacos against Maccabi Haifa shown that they can be clinical. Pilsen and Fiorentina, not too much to say. I'm not sure why the Fiorentina away fans, but I believe they were throwing flares because of the performance. Um, I will say one thing for Pilsen, like they would play a ball up the top. One of their front men would get the ball, but instead of trying to hold the ball up or like play a pass uh, with their feet on the ground, they would just try to like then he would like get the ball and then instantly try to like then chip it forward again for the next man. Um, it was a bit confusing because it's like you already have the transition moment. You already broke the first line. Like hold the ball, pass the midfield, and then spring like Vidra loose. I'm not sure why they kept on giving the ball back to Fiorentina by just um, by not trying to hold the ball up and so just immediately kick the ball up the field. So I mean, do you think that Fiorentina can hold up, certainly see the job through and help out the Italian coefficient? But yeah, I'm not sure why Pilsen just played in that overly direct way. But again, like, it was like, again overly direct, but not in like that Liverpool right play the ball on the ground, but just like basically trying to do like vertical 1-2s, which right I mean, conceptually are lower probability decisions. Villa Lille, I think Aston Villa can play somewhat slow at times, and I think a team like Lille, especially against like Jagrova, I think who is a really good dribbler, and I think and Haraldson also is a pretty good dribbler, can cause problems. And again, right, XG I think show right controlling the game in Villa Park. So I think this thing is very open. Um, and I do think some of Villa's recent performances have been lackluster. Uh, so I think they'll have a strong, very strong shout to prevail, even with the goal. And then Club Bruges versus Pauk. Personally, I think Pauk. I remember how Pauk smashed Frankfurt pretty decisively in the group stage. So I did rate Pauk. Um, not quite sure what happened here, but one goal. Yeah, I have a hard time trusting Club Bruges in these Belgian teams. I have a hard time with their consistency. So I do think Pauk have a decent shout as well. So those are my thoughts about um, the first leg of these quarterfinals. Uh, Let me know what you think. Again, if I back out. So okay, I think I'll have Pauk prevail. I will have Fiorentina, then Lille, and I will say Olympiacos see a job through. Uh, and then Champions League, uh, said what I said. What about Atleti, Barca, Madrid, and Bayern. So it should be interesting setup. But again, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think, and we will see how these results go in a week's time.